There's one major thing playing a huge part in holding you back from living the life that you want, from being the mom that you want, from finally letting go of what you went through, and that is trust. And when I say trust, I'm not just talking about trust issues with other people. Obviously, we're survivors of abuse, like we've gone through it. It is hard to trust other people. And we are moms who've gone through stuff, so we are hyper aware of who our kids are with, and we don't trust other people, and even if we like them by default, we can't trust them because we gotta keep our kids safe. That's not what I'm talking about. When I say trust issues, I'm talking about trusting yourself. It is incredibly difficult to build to this place where we actually trust ourselves and the decisions that we make. We've gone through all of this abuse, and so of course we don't trust other people. What people who haven't experienced it don't realize is they say, well, you should have just left. Why didn't you leave sooner? Why didn't you leave when you saw X, Y, and Z, right? And we as survivors, we already know that. And we beat ourselves up for it constantly. And because of that, we now do not trust ourselves to make good, important decisions or even unimportant decisions. It is very difficult to believe that we're going to make the right decisions to keep our kids safe when we couldn't even keep ourselves safe. It's hard to trust ourselves to follow through with goals. It's hard to even let ourselves believe that there's something more out there for us, that we deserve more, that we're worthy of more, because we don't trust ourselves to follow through and get it, or we don't trust ourselves to keep it once we have it. This is holding you back more than you know. I have been on my journey for over 4 years now, and I still find myself struggling with this. It is so difficult, yet so important to build up this self-trust so we can begin to step into the life that we truly desire. But first off, before I get into the how, we need to understand why. Why does this matter so much? The number one reason, and I truly believe that this is the most important reason, this is the biggest thing that we need to pay attention to, is the fact that if we don't trust ourselves, our kids will not only not trust us, but they're not going to trust themselves. Because they're going to say, my mom, my leader, the person I'm supposed to look up to doesn't even trust herself, so how on earth, with me, how am I supposed to trust me? And I'm not saying this to make you feel guilty. I'm saying this to bring awareness, because a lot of the time, these things are subconscious beliefs. We're not actively saying, I don't trust myself. Instead, it comes up as, you never follow through. You can never do that. You're not good enough. It's your brain trying to keep you safe from disappointment of failure. And so I'm not saying this to be like, oh, you're a bad mom because you don't trust yourself. Not at all. We are all a work in progress. What I'm saying is that now that you're aware of it, once you know better, you can do better. Now that you know better, it's time to do better. It's time to work on this. And I'm not trying to say it like it's easy, because it's not. This stuff takes time. The act of saying, oh, just learn to trust yourself, it may seem simple, but it's going to take time. And it's so important for us to make the commitment to ourselves and to fight against the mistrust that we have to believe in ourselves enough to trust ourselves. It's so important to begin to take baby steps towards that so we can model that for our kids. So that way we can say, we can tell our kids, or our kids will see that even though it took a while, or even if we're still on the journey, they can see us constantly working to reach that point, which shows them that they're allowed to constantly work until they reach the point that they want to be at. It's not easy, but it is 100% worth it. Another reason you want to build this self-trust with yourself is because you want to make sure that you can be aware of unhealthy or unsafe situations. Right now, you are gaslit so bad to the point that you believed that your reality began and ended with the abusive person. If you said the sky was blue, they told you it was green, and they made you so crazy that you believed it. We have to reacclimate ourselves to understanding what reality is. Because if not, we will believe that we are incapable of seeing the reality in front of us as true. And it can, one, push us back to the original relationship that we were in, or two, it can push us to be in another abusive, unhealthy relationship, or three, it can push us to leave our kids without a mom. I don't take these subjects lightly. They matter. We have to trust ourselves enough to be who we want to be. And sometimes we can't even think that far because our brains won't even process it. Instead of saying, I have to work to trust myself, I want you to say, I trust that I'm capable of learning the skills and staying committed until I trust myself. It is a nice in-between thought that can keep you going. Sometimes it's just too much to say, oh, I trust myself fully. That can be far too much. Saying something like, I trust myself to stay committed. I trust that I have the capability, or I have the capability to learn to trust myself. Whatever works for you. I want you to grab one of those thoughts and write them down and keep it close to you, because that's just going to help you stay focused and propel forward as you are on this journey to trust yourself. Now that we have the understanding behind it, now that we know how it's affecting our life, now that we know why it's so important to begin to change it, how do we actually do that? Number one, I want to say that it doesn't happen overnight. I've said it over and over and I'll continue saying it. This stuff takes time. And the annoying fact of the matter is that it's going to take your brain however long it takes. I've worked with clients who have massively built their self-trust in the matter of a couple of months, and I've worked with clients that I've worked with one-on-one for 3 months, and I check in on a year later and they are still on that journey. One is not better than the other. One is not more intelligent than the other, more committed than the other. They're just two people who are actively working, and it's taking their brain however long it's going to take. As long as you make the commitment, I guarantee you change will come. And number two, I want you to begin to work towards forgiving yourself. Forgive yourself for getting into the abusive relationship. Forgive yourself for giving your children an abusive parent. Forgive yourself for falling into the trap again and again and again. Forgive yourself. And I know that that's easier said than done, and that's a whole nother video or a whole nother podcast episode for a whole nother time. But I want you to begin to process that thought. Because right now your brain tells you that it's your fault, that you deserved it, that you asked for it. In fact, your brain might be telling you that if you just did better, if you worked harder, if you would have cared more, if you would have been less of a prude, if you would have done all of these things, then maybe it wouldn't have gotten so bad, and maybe you wouldn't be alone. Maybe that wouldn't have happened. And that's really heavy to carry. So you need to take some time to forgive yourself. You might not be able to accept that it wasn't your fault, because it wasn't. But I want you to begin the act of forgiving yourself for getting into the situation. I am not blaming you for it at all, but that can be hard for our brain to comprehend. So if you've been in multiple abusive relationships like I was, where you fell from one to another to another to another, that feels really heavy and like it was your fault and like you should have seen better. And until you work through the process of forgiving yourself, you will not be able to really step into self-trust. And this is a work in progress. It is continual. I'm doing it right there with you. This stuff is hard. I have to actively work towards forgiving myself every day. Because every day something comes up and I'm like, ugh, if only this would have been different. Ugh. If only I wouldn't have snapped at my kid. Oh my God, I really wish I wouldn't have been triggered at the grocery store. Oh my God, I really wish my social anxiety wasn't so bad so we had to leave the park. It's a work in progress. And it takes time. And you're doing a good job. Now, how do we actually build this self-trust? Now that we understand we need to give ourselves grace and we need to be on this journey of personal forgiveness, how do we step into this next chapter of our life where we actually begin to trust ourselves? So number one, I want you to pull out a journal. And at the top, you're just gonna write trust issues or self-trust. I like writing things like trust issues because it's like, all right, like it feels sassy to me to just write that down and just claim it. If not, you can just write learning to trust myself. And this is going to be your journal page, your notebook, the place where you can come back to and continually work on this. First, I want you to brain dump whatever comes to mind. And if you need some prompts, write these down, make note of these somewhere. How do you think that lack of self-trust is showing up in your parenting? How do you think lack of self-trust is showing up in your relationships? Do you have walls up? Do you really connect with your kids? Do you feel qualified to parent your kids? These questions can be really heavy, but the reason why I want you to write these down and begin to use these to answer these, if you want to use this as a 5-minute brain dump every day for the next week, you can do that. You can use this just as inspiration. You can use this to maybe have a couple thoughts come up and write down something different. And that's another thing before I move on to the next point, is that if the question you choose to answer is what are goals that you want to work towards but you haven't started yet, and all of a sudden you find yourself thinking about the relationship you were in, that's fine, keep writing. Do not force yourself to stick to the question. The question is only there to get the ball rolling. And you've just started this process of allowing yourself to really brain dump and think through. It's gonna take time because your brain's not gonna know what the hell to do with it. As you begin to do it more often, you won't have to have these prompts, or at least not always. The power of these prompts is not to make you answer this exact question. It's just to get your brain to open up a little bit, to hopefully get the floodgates moving, so then that way you know you have a lot of things to, one, get out of your head and onto paper, but two, things that you can pinpoint and see. After you've had this brain dump, I want you to look over the list, or look over the brain dump that you did and see what comes up for you. And I want you to look at it through the lens of, is this connected to lack of self-trust? That's the question you're gonna ask yourself as you read through what you wrote. And then what I want you to do is, if it does connect to a lack of self-trust, even if there's an inkling in your tummy, like maybe it might be connected to lack of self-trust, I want you to highlight it, underline it, put a star next to it, make it clear. Because I want you to do this through your whole brain dump list. Your brain dump list might be a paragraph, it might be 2 pages. And then I want you to take that thought and write it on the next page. It feels tedious, but bear with me. Write it on the next page and ask yourself, how is this connected to lack of self-trust? And just begin to write. Just begin to write whatever comes to mind. That inkling, what is that inkling? Just say, man, I don't really know for sure, but I feel in my gut that I did X, Y, and Z because I didn't trust myself, and that led to this, and that led to this, which led to this event. It doesn't have to be an exact science. You're just doing it one thought, one question at a time. And the reason I'm having you do this exercise in this way is because when you begin to ask yourself these questions, you see things differently. Because you might be watching this or listening to this, whether you're watching on YouTube or listening to the podcast, and saying to yourself, I don't have trust issues. I don't think this applies to me. But then as you begin to journal, you realize, oh, it does apply to me. It does apply to what I'm doing. It is impacting my life. Once you've had a chance to process through these questions, I want you to look at your answers and take a big deep breath in through your nose and out through your mouth. And then I want you to take a second and celebrate what you did. Because you took the time to do this work. And that's not easy work. I'm not saying this to be cheesy either. I am dead serious. Take the time to celebrate what you just did. Because that's not easy work. And celebrating is actually going to get you one step closer to trusting yourself. Because you're going to get that message cemented in your brain that, oh, I actually can do this. Oh, I actually am capable of making things happen. Oh, you're telling me that I can actually do X, Y, and Z. Slowly but surely, that's gonna help build up that sense of self-trust. And now here are 3 things that you can do to help build your sense of self-trust. Number 1 is to set a goal that is easily achievable, but is going to push you maybe within a certain amount of time. It's a really easy goal, it's a really simple goal, but it's one that's gonna force you to stick to something, to stay committed to something. Maybe you wanna do a devotion every day for 10 days. Maybe you want to journal every day for 4 days. Maybe you want to take a course or read a book or whatever that is. You can set yourself a small goal, and then once you achieve that goal, celebrate that, get it in your brain and say, hey brain, look, we did it. And then do it again, and then another one, and then another one, and let them slowly get more difficult. Another thing that you can do towards building your sense of self-trust is learning to find and manage your triggers. Your triggers cause you to react instead of respond. And all a trigger is an event that causes another event to happen. Just like we see with veterans, if they're with fireworks and a firework goes off, it can send them right back to where they were in the war, and they will act as if they are there. This happens with survivors too. And our kids are the best at pushing all of our buttons. And kids are extremely triggering. Add in what we've gone through and that makes it more difficult. Taking the time to find what your triggers are and learning how to cope with them is a huge, huge part of learning how to trust yourself. Because when you react less and respond more, you can trust yourself to react to your kids in a way that you want to, in a way that doesn't make you feel guilty after, in a way that you're proud of. And if you're wanting to learn how to manage your triggers but you don't really know where to start, I actually have an ebook that I wrote. It's completely free that walks you through my triggers framework that I actually teach my paying clients. It's completely free. I want it to be accessible to you. The link for that will be down in the description or down in the show notes if you're listening on the podcast. The third thing that I want you to do is to learn how to set and keep boundaries. This is going to take time and effort, and it's not going to be easy, and it's going to make you uncomfortable, and that's okay because you can do this. Learning how to set and keep boundaries is a huge way that you can learn to trust yourself, because right now you do not trust yourself to keep a boundary. You don't trust yourself to even keep a boundary with your kids, keep a boundary with your partner, keep a boundary with family, with social media. You don't trust yourself with boundaries, so you don't set any at all, so you just feel walked over because your brain says you're never going to do it anyway, so why bother? Learning how to set and communicate and enforce your boundaries is key to learning how to trust yourself. And again, if you are wanting to work towards this and you want to know how to set boundaries, but you don't know where to start, I have an ebook for that as well that I wrote. It's really short, really actionable. It's a 3-step framework that I walk you through. Again, you can have completely for free. Link for that down in the show notes description, whether you're listening or watching. Taking the time to learn how to trust yourself is far easier said than done, but it is 100% worth it. If you don't feel worthy enough to learn how to trust yourself, if you don't feel deserving of these things, then don't do it for you. Do it for your kids. I think the right thing, wrong reason is perfectly fine. And actually, healing for our kids is a pretty dang good reason. And don't forget about those free resources down in the description, in the show notes. Go grab them. They're completely free. You've got nothing to lose. Thank you guys so much for hanging out, and I will see you on the next one.